His question was that he read an essay, an article that said that 30% of children in the public schools suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand that. And I think the fact of the matter is that most of us suffer from some kind of traumatic stress. Being black in America produces trauma. And I think the answer to that is, multiple therapies for it, but I think the greatest therapy for black people is the creation of a social movement that fights for justice. And it transforms people. We cannot transform ourselves for the most part as individuals. That's why I'm an advocate of being involved in demonstrating. That's what and I just take it from Mamie Till Mobley, what she said, she said that the strength that she evidenced throughout the rest of her life after the killing of EMMITT came from the fact that she involved herself in protest, in standing up, in talking about what had happened to her son. And I think that is the greatest answer for our people to fight for liberation, because the problems that we face, psychological and otherwise, cannot be solved in the framework of the existing system of white supremacy and capitalism. It just won't work. It just won't work. And I don't think our path to liberation is setting up small businesses. Now, I'm not against small business, but that is not the economic answer to our problem. We have to talk about a massive redistribution of wealth and income. And if you want to ask me, if you want me to be more specific, we have to talk about nationalizing these banks, who have, over the last 3 years, been given something like $4 trillion from the Federal Reserve, under the guise that by giving them the money, they would loan the money to, I guess, us. But we have seen that that has just kept the money at the top. We have to rearrange the whole system of economic relationships in this society. But without a serious attack upon the institutions of white supremacy. See, a lot of people say, well, the economy will solve, if we get the economy straight, we could solve all the other problems. Rising tides raises all ships. Well, in a certain way it does. But one thing we do know, that when it comes to black people, the trickle down kind of ends at the color line. You know what I'm saying? So we have a double task. We have to attack the system of economic inequality, but then the system of white supremacy, its institutions, its psychology, and all of its practices. If you want to ask me, what can we do in the city of Philadelphia? We can start by fighting for public education and full funding for public education. And if you want to ask me, well, I'm going a little bit beyond, but one of the problems that we face is that the disappointment of black people and black leadership. How many times are we going to vote to put a black person in office, and then we end up doing worse than we did before we put him in office? How do you explain this? 3 of the last 4 black mayors have been black, but we have a worse public education situation than we've ever had in this city. Black folk are poorer than before we ever had a black mayor. You know what I'm saying? So we elect black people who constitute themselves as a black misleadership class and serve the very interests that are taking the money from the communities and putting it in the center of the city. And, I know Darrell Clark. I've known him for a long time. I disagree with him when he says, I am developer friendly. Now, I'm from North Philly. I know what that means. I know Cecil B. Moore Avenue. I know what it looked like back in the days, and I know what it looks like now. And it's not a pretty sight. The transformation of North Philadelphia into so-called Temple Town, and no resistance from the Black Miss Leadership class. No resistance. I mean, say something. You know, Temple is going to try to rename the Cecil B. Moore stop on the subway the Temple stop. So they cover up the name Cecil B. Moore. Did it. Now, you know, Temple is not like Penn. Temple is a public university. In other words, we give them money and a lot of other things to do what they do and humiliate black folk. So I think the answer that I always give to stress and post-traumatic slave syndrome and everything else that has to do with the psychological problems that black people face, we have to unite and fight. In the churches, we have to stand up. We need liberation theology. You know, yes, I'm for milk and honey in the hereafter, but I'm for it here also. You know what I'm saying? And we have to develop a culture of resistance. But I'll get to that later. I'm talking too long in that question. Well, reparations is very important, and it's a part of the economic repairing of the black community. But we have to say what we mean by it, and I think that what we should mean by it is the transfer of wealth. Number one, reparations for black people, just like a public education system in the South after slavery for black people, benefits all people. You see what I'm saying? If we are to be repaired, the money must come from where the money is. We must talk about a redirection of priorities by the government. So I think for black people to get reparations is going to require a political and economic transformation of the country. Good evening.
I'm here on behalf of St. Freedom Academy Charter School. And so the question that we have, as we're transitioning to pursue secondary education, we would like to know, like, what is expected of us? Because we've already been doing work around like, economic power, mass incarceration, and quality education.
Could you slow down just a
I'm
little bit?
So we've already been like doing work during our high school career around economic power and mass incarceration. In our 9th grade year, we led a school walkout that focused on quality education. So we kind of want to know like what's next, because we kind of have a stubborn, you know, what can I say, a new, like I don't want to say tradition of people. What's the, I can't think of the word. A new, yeah, like a new.
A new one?
No, like when generation. That's the
word.
Okay. Okay, so we have like a new generation of people, and most of people describe them as being stubborn or, you know, disrespectful to their elders. So what type of advice would you give us to, you know, lead this new revolution and help support our elders and ancestors as well?
I don't know if I have the answer. Well, one thing, you know, in January, the 8th through the 10th, we're organizing at Temple University a conference entitled Reclaiming Our Future, the Black Radical Tradition in Our Time. And I would invite Sankofa and other charter schools and public school students to attend that. Cornell West is going to speak, Angela Davis is going to speak, and, you know, a whole number of others, and community activists are going to speak. And I think the education of the younger generation is very important. Now, part of the education of the younger generation is creating a culture of resistance. And this means against the culture of the corporate culture that they call pop culture, that is controlled by large entertainment corporations, which feed to the black community too often. Now, we can dispute this, I mean, whether it's, you know, kind of racist images that go back to the period of Jim Crow. We do not see images in the media of black people fighting for liberation. And so I think that all of our focus, and I think my approach when I'm dealing with younger people, is always to emphasize the imperative of struggle, the great moral imperative for black people. If we are serious about bettering our conditions, is to unite in resistance to what is happening. People have to begin to speak up. You know, let me just say this, John, I'm not going to talk too long.
Take your time. I've learned my lesson after all these years.
You know, Martin Luther King said that silence is betrayal.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
You know, too many of us are silent when we shouldn't be. A lot of times we say, well, I don't want to jeopardize my job. But in not jeopardizing your job, you're jeopardizing your children's future.
That's right.
We have to speak up. And you know, that's what the example of Mamie Till Mobley is. And I think, like in Sankofa, in other charter schools, in our homes, we need to talk about the example of Mamie Till Mobley. I think to know that, and to know that story, and Emmett Till and all of that, is, it empowers people. Like they say, knowledge is power. That's all I would say on that, if I understood the question, but we could talk more.
Please stand up.
Philadelphia is another state compared to the rest of Pennsylvania. This is one of the most racist states in all America. And we see it with our blinders on, act like we don't understand this. And that's why we have half the problem we have. Everything you say is the truth. I love you. God bless you. Right on.
Thank you, my brother.
Darren, Dr. Tyler.
Dr. Montero.
Yes. Yes, sir.
I wanted to talk about the state of HBCUs. It seems like education, higher education for blacks, specifically HBCUs. You mentioned how white, poor Americans will refuse to go to some of these schools. Well, now you have in 2016 where you have blacks who are refusing to go to these schools. And what's happening is we're losing these schools. St. Paul University closed down in Virginia. Cheney's having this a huge economic problem right now, just to stay open. Where do you see, and I don't know this because of blacks being told to assimilate into the larger universities, the Penn's, the Temples, you know, come over to us, you don't need that HBCU education. I just want to know, where do you see it going? You mentioned education from earlier years, from 30 years where policies were in place, when these policies are starting to manifest itself now, and HBCUs are the product of those poor policies that was in place. What do we need to do in order to kind of stop that cycle in terms of reinvesting back into our educational institutions?
He's asking the question about the historically black colleges and universities and the financial crisis that they face. And, you know, we could go even further, the numbers of black students that prefer to go to white colleges because, you know, everything white is better than everything black. Black professors prefer to teach at white universities, so on and so forth. You know, hey, Sonny, hold up, man. That's all right. The two major autonomous institutions in the black community, the black nation, are the black church and the historically black college and universities. They are our two autonomous, major autonomous institutions. They have both been weakened in the post-civil rights period. It was like a bait and switch on us. Get integrated and you'll do better and you won't need your black institutions. Now, thankfully, most of us, if we go to a church or a mosque, we go to a black one. I went to a black college. And let me tell you something. I would not exchange that experience for anything. Let me tell you why. I graduated from Central High School. Back in the days, they didn't want you in Central, and they didn't hide that fact. So when I got to Lincoln University, everybody was black, including the white people. Everybody. You know, because black is more than a physical presence, it is a culture, it is a civilization. And once you cross that color line into the black universe, you either become black or you go back on the other side. But in black institutions, there's black love. Black people, in spite of all of our contradictions, we believe in each other more than white people believe in us. I don't know whether I made that clear. You know, we got a lot of problems of double consciousness, of internalized self-hate, all that type of thing. But we, in general, care more about each other than white people care about us. Therefore, in black institutions, even if you had a rocky road in high school, there's somebody that's going to reach out a hand to help you. You see what I'm saying? I know at Temple University, I won't even mention the University of Pennsylvania, I don't think they ever had a program of remediation. That if you came from a Philadelphia public school, you recognize that the Philadelphia public schools are in crisis. Don't blame the kid. Help the kid. But you go to a white school, you're treated often with utter contempt. In black universities, now we didn't call ourselves having an African-centered curriculum or anything like that, but it was that. And I think that part of the fight, as Ron asked about reparations, we have to fight for reparations to rebuild what was something like 126, it might be down to 120, 115 historically black colleges and institutions, including Cheney. Including Cheney. Now they claim they're the oldest black college. They're really not. But they go back, but they can be the oldest if they go back to the Institute of Colored Youth in South Philly. The great institute, and Mary Jackson Coppin. And I could mention O.V. Caddo and all them people that came out of that. But this glorious history that must be continued, not just as an institution, but in our memory. I went to Lincoln University. We said we were the oldest black college. Well, we'll dispute that. But when you walk on that ground at Lincoln University, you knew you were walking on ground that Thurgood Marshall walked on, that Langston Hughes walked on, that Kwame Nkrumah and Nnamdi Azikiwe, the first presidents of Ghana and Nigeria, walked on. We went to school with Gil Scott-Heron, the great Gil Scott-Heron. That's where you grow. John Huggins and Erica Huggins, we're students together. You don't get that in a white college. You go to graduate school wherever you can get in. But to have that foundation in a black institution builds black character and purpose. You know what your life's work should be. And even when you graduate, there's something that happens that lets you know that you got to do something for black people.
That's right.
That's what you learn there. Now they say we don't have the professors that they have at the white institutions. Well, I'll tell you, like Du Bois said after he graduated from Fisk University. You know, Du Bois, people don't know this, they get it all wrong. You know, his first degree was from Fisk University. He loved Fisk University. When he graduated from there, he went to Harvard. And they told him, well, we'll accept you, but you got to redo your undergraduate degree. To which Du Bois replied, my professors at Harvard were no better than the ones at Fisk. They were just better known. In other words, they had the complexions and the connections. So I think the black institutions, if we are to rebuild the black nation, and I think the sooner we see ourselves as a nation within the nation, the better off we will be. Because when we look at ourselves that way, then we can understand our strategy for struggle better. We can understand the condition we're in better. Because we are treated like a foreign nation within the nation. So I think we have to rebuild the black church. I think the black church has to go to the theology of a liberation theology and away from the theology of money. And I think we have to rebuild the black colleges and universities based upon a purpose. And the purpose of the black colleges and universities have to be what they were when they were founded, building the black nation.
So we're going to go with this young lady. We're going to go with you, ma'am, and then the gentleman in the back. Please stand up.
Excuse me, my sister, could you start over again? Yeah, I mean. Right.
And the professor, like, he opened my eyes to like a new world of what's going on.
Is it Brandon Sanford?
Of what's going on in the United States with this inequality. Because, you know, I had that disease of not knowing that racism still exists. So with seeing so many young people in the audience, you can see that we do have our eyes open. The young lady here said that she's doing research into mass incarceration and economics, and her question was, what is her next step? She wants to know what's the next step for her friends. So my question to you, doctor, is like, we have so much technology that's distracting our young people. And you said Harriet Tubman was the first soldier, and she led
woman officer,
who led 265,000 slaves to overturn that movement. We have technology that distracts us. So how do we start a social movement? How do we resist? How do we speak up? Like, what does that look like? We have corrupt mayors, we have corrupt council people. Who do we go to create something? Like, how do you start a social movement? If you want to, we got people here that's ready to do it, I'm sure. How do you do that?
Well, I can't answer. You know, the how-to is often very difficult. You know, the theory and the, prescription that what we need, et cetera, is the easy part. But let me just kind of begin with a quote from Curtis Mayfield. Y'all know Curtis Mayfield? He said, the people must prove to the people a better day is coming. And I think a people-centered ideology or philosophy is the start. I think too often we are distracted, not just by culture or television, but by this focus upon leaders and celebrities. And leaders are celebrities, so to speak. I'm of the opinion that the sooner we decide that we can make a difference, that none of us is too small to make a big difference. Martin Luther King was fond of saying, we can all be great because we can all serve. Mamie Till Mobley didn't think she could make a difference, didn't think she could, why should I be concerned? I think that I think what you're learning about economic and social inequality in the United States is a beginning. A lot of responsibility is going to fall on your shoulders and all of the educated young black people, because it is we who have to go among our people and help to educate them. And when people know different things, they will act differently. And that's my opinion. Now, you know, Huey P. Newton, one of the founders of the Black Panther Party, talks about in his memoir called Revolutionary Suicide, he talks about how the party, the Black Panther Party, had become too centered upon the gun. And he said, we need the gun. We picked up the gun to defend the community against the police. He said, but the party's program, its 10-point program, can only be implemented if the party is deeply rooted among the people. And so he therefore talked about, which I advocate in this time, survival programs. What do we mean by survival programs? Public schools are failing. Although we fight for public schools, we set up in our community after-school programs. Children are hungry. We have to do what the Panthers did, breakfast programs. Tens of thousands of our young men and women are in prison, often forgotten. We have to set up community prison programs. I think our focus has to be upon the collective black community rather than our individual needs. Let me just say one thing from King, and I know I'm speaking more philosophically. King gave a very famous speech. In fact, it is the sermon that I think he gave more than any other, called 3 Dimensions of a Complete Life. And he said the 3 dimensions are, first, the dimension of living a long life. He said everybody wants to live a long life. Everybody wants to live a relatively good life. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that is not a complete life. That's only one part. The second part is the part of service to the community, doing for the community and doing for humanity. Well, that requires, in an inhumane nation and an inhumane world, standing up and speaking out, teaching others. Now, you don't have to be, crazy about it, but standing up, speaking when it's called for, being responsible. But then he said there's a third dimension. And he said, we have a cosmic partnership. We are one with the universe. And the way that he talked about this is to me, more compelling than the phrase itself. And that is, he said, we are all wrapped in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects us all indirectly. A lot of our inability to actually create the movement that we want, to create the young people that we want, flows from the fact that our philosophical and moral outlooks are not right. This rampant commercialism and materialism and individualism that consumes our country has taken us into confusion as a society, and certainly the black nation is mired in confusion. And we have to admit we're on the verge of moral collapse, certainly of moral decadence. So much so that a lot of people say there is no hope. I hear a lot of people say that. Some of my best friends, in fact, my cousin, whose opinion I respect highly, he says, I don't see it. I don't see how we come out of this. I tend to be optimistic, and I always see a way out of a crisis. But it demands and requires the people, and like Curtis Mayfield said, the people have to prove to the people a better day is coming. We cannot wait for leaders. We cannot wait for celebrities. We cannot wait for people with PhDs. You'd be surprised how little they know. The people, so that's the way I would go about it.
Ma'am?
Yeah. If I could just, if I understand the question. You see, from a political and ideological standpoint, I begin with the centrality of African American liberation. By that I mean that the consolidation of the African American people and our movement for freedom is central and strategic to all other liberatory processes within this country. So I think a lot of weight falls upon what we do and how effective we are in mobilizing and uniting and educating our people. But I do agree with you. Black people's liberation is not going to occur just on the basis of what black people do. We need the support and alliances of all of those who are injured in one or another way by the system of neoliberal capitalism. Now, a lot of people don't see it that way, but I think history proves that that is the geography or the architecture of the fight for democracy and for liberation in this country. But I agree we need, better education. Most of the best education that any of us will get will be outside of the walls of the university. So we must therefore set up in the churches, in the Masonic halls, in the community centers, schools. At the Church of the Advocate, we have what's been going on for almost 4 years now, a Saturday free school called Philosophy and Black Liberation. We spent, and just in the recent period, we spent 8 weeks on James Baldwin. And I highly recommend that. We're now doing, for at least a couple of months, we've been doing Du Bois's Black Reconstruction in America. Hopefully, we will do George Jackson, and we've done Huey Newton and others. But we have to begin to read those writers and thinkers that were about liberation and about engagement. And we could come up with the syllabuses and so on and the book lists in the future. But I thank you for your question. I thank everybody for coming out. Again, I want to apologize for being a little bit late. And I don't do this at all.
At all.
And it's the fact that I came down with some flu, and you know how a flu will do you. You lay down for a minute, and next thing you know, you can't get up. So, but let me just say, I'd like to thank Chad for all of his hard work in mobilizing this. And I'd like to thank you once again for coming out. So thank you.
Let's give Dr. Montero a round of applause again. Thank you. We just have one announcement. We just have one brief announcement. If you can just be so kind to leave us your first and last name and your email address, because we want to send you a copy of this lecture. Hold up. In addition, in November, we're having our next social, give me a second, please, everyone. In November, we're having our second social justice lecture series on mass incarceration, and that'll feature our colleague, Dr. Mark Lamont Hill. In December, we're going to have our final social justice lecture series of this fall, and that will be with some of our colleagues, both in city government, Nellie Fitzpatrick of the Mayor's Office of LGBTQT, as well as some of our colleagues in the LGBTQT community, simply because we want to address some of the irrational hatred that we see, some of the homophobic behaviors, some of the transphobic behaviors that we see. So I know that some of you may have been pressed for time, but if you could just sign your first and last name and your email address, we want to reach out to you. We're going to provide the DVD of this lecture free for you. We'll also give you the pictures on Flickr, but we also want to be able to promote some of the things that we have coming in November. Once again, a social justice lecture featuring Dr. Mark Lamont Hill on mass incarceration, and another one in December on the LGBTQ community. Thank you, and have a great evening.